Welcome to lesson 7 of the Tantric Taste. Today we're going to be exploring the sexual shadow and the animus. So let's start with the animus. The animus is the unconscious masculine side of a woman. And this is a figure that shows up in our dreams as the primary male character in the dream. Why is this important to keep in mind? Well, because the animus reveals a lot about our repressions, about our shadow, about both golden and dark shadow. And it's also a figure that whenever we begin practicing Tantra, is going to hold a lot of information for us. Astrologically, we can look at the animus and the daemon from analyzing Ketu in our chart. So whenever we look at the Vedic chart, the south node of the moon called Ketu, that is this unconscious energy that we're bringing from past lives. And this is a very important energy to work with because Ketu is the planet of liberation and the dissolution of Maya, the final freedom of moksha. And in Tantra, this weaving that we're doing of like our inner Shiva with our inner Shakti, the goal of it, right, is to find that liberation while we are here, while we are alive, living our human lives. So whenever we begin churning the sexual energy with all of this practice, especially after the practice that we learned yesterday that is going to start like pulling a lot of energy. It's extremely important to keep a dream journal because you'll be able to see how is your animus showing up in dreams. If there is a transformation, for example, maybe you had dreams where the animus always showed up as just like this random man that was just a character in the dream. Maybe it showed up as your father. Sometimes for me has shown up as giants, as like warriors. And you'll be able to feel it. Now you're gonna tell me, well, I've never really, looked at my dreams from this perspective. Well, from today, now that you're listening to this, now you'll know that whenever a male shows up in your dreams, if you're female, that will be your animus. And maybe there's multiple, but there's like this primary character that is either on the background or it's there or you're interacting with it. And the most important thing to do with this is to start writing down all of this. If you are unable to remember your dreams, then I suggest you take some herbs. There's like blue lotus, and there's mugwort is also very good for this type of work. So if you make yourself a mugwort and blue lotus tea before bed, it will make it easier so you can remember your dreams. So the most important thing is to just make sure that you have a dream journal so you can start examining your animus. Now, what are we looking for? I'm going to give you examples from my dreams because that's the only point of reference that I really have and some of my clients' dreams. But whenever I started learning about Tantra and practicing, every time that I saw my animus, he will be behind some form of cage or wall or like separated from me, usually look like a very powerful man. It was like there were a lot of dreams where like he was in the mafia or something. Like, I'm Colombian, so I have a lot of references to all of that. So there was this like energy of like this powerful figure on the background. Whenever I started bringing my attention to my sexual energy and actively looking out for like this character in my dreams, then it transformed into this, the warriors from, from Game of Thrones, what were they called? The Dothraki, those. It would show up like a warrior like that was like, cornering me around. Then it showed up as a giant that had a giant male organ. And all of that they were pieces, because when I started journaling them and started writing them down, I started seeing a story unfold on my relationship to my sexuality, my relationship to that unconscious masculine aspect of myself. And this is very important to keep an eye on whenever we are churning this much sexual energy. Now, that's the animus. Now we're looking at the sexual shadow. So with the sexual shadow, it can show up in dreams, but it's better if you start actively exploring this part of yourself. How do you do that? Well, asking yourself certain questions. For example, whenever you do the edging exercise that we did last night, what is going on? Do you notice the day after that there are certain behaviors that are popping up more? Do you notice that your thoughts became more sexual in nature? Because the most common thing that I've heard is I started doing this and all I can think about is sex. And this is that, like, that sexual thought, that's not tantra, that's lust. The tantric process is like the inner weaving, but this lust that is showing up is what's being purified. And as long as you observe it without judgment, that means that you are loving it. That means that your inner Shiva is observing that expression of Shakti. There's nothing inherently wrong with lust. What makes it wrong is whenever we reject that part of ourselves and suppress it or demonize it, because that creates separation. And that is the opposite of Tantra. Tantra is the weaving together. So we want to become hyper aware of the sexual shadows. Also, are there certain fantasies that might trigger shame or guilt? If you learn to sit with the energies of guilt and shame, you are able to navigate this path and any path with ease, because those are very debilitating emotions and they are rooted on the mother wound. And if there is sexual repression or sexual trauma, there's going to be a very heightened element of guilt and shame. So learning to not demonize it and not think, the biggest misconception about this path is that you're supposed to be feeling like, oh, like just in pleasure all the time and have the orgasmic life. That's bullshit. Life is life, you know, like there are ups and downs and we have to do very mundane things. And like, it's unrealistic to expect that we're in this like constant state of pleasure. That is anyways. That's not what we want here. What we want is to be able to be present with those darker emotions, because this is a serpent that's cleaning up, that's like moving and it's like triggering. And if you ever heard or been in a plant medicine ceremony, there's also the symbolism of the anaconda and the snake moves in, and that's where all the purge happens. So something similar is happening whenever we begin churning the sexual energy in this way, and the sexual shadow comes to our awareness. Something that can also happen is that there is this like unshakable sense of guilt or shame, or you feel like you're doing something bad, or you're going to start demonizing the practice, or there's like the religious programming. I've heard this from actually quite a few women where they're like, I feel like I was like dabbing with the devil, you know, because there's such a strong association of female sexuality to the demonization of it, to like the snake energy of the devil under the, you know, the Abrahamic religion lens. This is a very like strong program that we all have carried in humanity for, you know, thousands of years. So it's not something that just goes away because we're in modern times and we have, you know, created space for the feminine to exist in all of ourselves and for women to have the right to express their sexuality. It doesn't just go away. Like, that is in the cellular memory. So those things can start popping up. If at some point you start getting scared because of that, because the religious programming kicks in and you feel like, you know, it's the devil, then connect with your heart, pray, you know, like whatever is your source of connection with divinity, leave to the side the energy of Tripura Sundari, leave to the side all these Hindu names, and connect with your birth God, you know, like whatever feels safest for your inner child. Come back to that, regroup, and then go back to the practices without the imagery. Because that has happened where there's this like fragmentation of all these feelings of shame and guilt. I'm going to like put them in a box of, oh, the whole thing must be bad, right? And we don't want to do that. We have to keep in mind that our history, like as human beings, it's full of demonization of sexual energy, especially for women. It's like it's bad, it's gross, it's like you don't go there. So these are some of like the sexual shadows that can come up to the surface whenever we do these practices. And keeping in mind that, you know, you're gonna be having certain dreams, your animus is gonna show up, is gonna give you a lot of information about like your sexuality, because we're moving with that energy, and also how it's showing up in your everyday life. Maybe it shows up, you know, again, there's like the shame guilt side of the pendulum, and then there is the lustful side of the pendulum, where you feel like this insatiable hunger, and then all of a sudden you're like crushing on everybody and just like you know. And that is also something to know, to observe, to witness in yourself, and be playful with it. Whatever side you are moving on, whatever shadows come to the surface, just be more playful with it. If you're able to maintain the lightness and space with like, oh my God, there it is, there is that sexual shadow, it's finally here, and you take it with curiosity and playfulness, and not as like this thing that is like corrupting your practice, or this thing that is telling you like, oh, it's my intuition telling me to stop. It's like, it's all part of that clearing process. The first 3 months, I will say, the first 3 months of intense practice, they move a lot of things, not only sexually but also emotionally. So also notice if if you have like love at first sight circumstances happening in your life, just pay attention. Don't take anything that happens during this time as like, this is, I must do this. Take it more as, life is giving me information about what I am holding in my sexual centers. One final thought is that if during this time you get pursued by somebody, notice your internal reactions, your emotions. And at the same time, notice if you feel the desire of sexually pursuing somebody. What happens if you get rejected at work, if an idea gets rejected? All of these things, they are, because we are moving sexual energy, all of this stuff is giving you information about the sexual shadows, and also your animus is going to help you shed light on those sexual shadows as well. So to conclude, make sure you get yourself a dream journal, or open up a little note on your phone where you can track your dreams as you're going through this process. And I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.